So, can you hear me? Okay. So, welcome to the final session of these 2 wonderfully intense days of study and dialogue, and which I have the pleasure of chairing, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. The first Inquire International Conference closes today in the best way, that is, with an opening to the future, taking us into 5 current research projects. And the session is going to be very intense. For this reason, I ask all the speakers to do as best they can to keep their papers within 10 or 12 minutes at most. We will have one more speaker, who is going to be Isabella Gagliardi. But the first speaker will be David Zbiral. Good evening, David. David is a historian of religion working on medieval Christianity with an interdisciplinary view open to historical anthropology and computational approaches. His main focus is on religious non-conformism and its repression in medieval Europe. And he is the director of the Center for the Digital Research of Religion at Nazareth University, and is the leader of the Dissident network project, which we will shortly find out thanks to his paper. And I give you the floor, David.
Thank you very much. First, do you see my presentation and do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So, good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and in some kind of flash presentation, I will try to present a project which is very much interested in transforming medieval inquisitorial records into structured data, and then analyzing this structured data by various means of computational modeling. And more particularly, we are interested in 3 kinds of patterns: social, spatial, but also discursive ones, and not only of dissidence, but also Inquisition. Now, this project has a history. We have just started actually the bigger project, which will run now for 5 years. But we have investigated previously a project of a similar name and slightly smaller in its scale and also in the scale of the team. But definitely it enabled us to work on some exciting possibilities in order to make new uses of medieval inquisitorial records for the service of both history and the social sciences. Now, I'm not working on this project alone by any means. It's a team project where I benefit from the work of many. Some of them are from the old DISSINET team. Some of them have recently joined the project, and I want to acknowledge their work here. Now, the DISSINET project, its overall aim is really to understand diverse patterns which escape close reading. If we are reading inquisitorial records from the beginning to the end, very closely focusing on each detail, it gives us, of course, one perspective. Another perspective can be given by very distant reading and really computational text analysis of these records. We're trying actually to bridge between these perspectives in something we call scalable reading. So basically, it can be compared to Google Maps in the sense that you can zoom in and you can zoom out at will. So we remain very close to our medieval sources, but we also are interested in seeing the broad patterns of human interactivity in the past. Now, so what we are promoting by the way of this project, which is really focusing on inquisitorial records, on trial interaction, on people investigated, is that we also promote some novel approaches to the uses of structured data in history and the social sciences, in the ultimate interest of understanding how dissidence works, how inquisitorial interaction works. So basically, how even more complex social phenomena emerge from local interactions. Of course, we do that because we very much believe in the power of structured data, but structured data which are not superficial. Most of us know quantitative history as something which is very much anchored in slightly superficial tables of punishments by the Inquisition, or perhaps the number of cases in individual regions and having some economic theories about this. We're not doing that. We're not doing this kind of quantitative macro history. We are really very much the kind of history that might be even termed perhaps quantitative micro history, but again with the important point that we're really trying and striving to find the broader patterns behind all this. So, for example, if we are interested in the roles of women and men in medieval dissident movements, we very much try to go in the detail, look at the sources, but we are transforming them word by word into structured data, which is extremely time-consuming, as you can imagine, but then it proves us some firm grounds for making some comparisons important for theorizing dissent, inquisitorial trials, and even some aspects of human behavior in pre-modern societies. So our approach to data collection is very much informed by what we call source modeling. There is a programmatic paper that we have just published. Actually, it's a preprint that you can download freely from the Zenodo repository, and it explains much of what I will not have the time to speak this evening. It explains our approach to the data collection and analysis, and what the computer science people would call data model. So basically ontology of working with inquisitorial records and the information they convey. Now we're trying to remain very close to our sources. So we preserve a lot of things that a project just oriented on the positive data would probably miss. We try to focus on the order of information. Each piece of information is given in a specific context, from a deponent to an inquisitor. There is a notary who is writing this down. So all this context, of course, so vital for the more qualitative historical traditional studies, we try to preserve as well, because we think that is absolutely vital for understanding the information we are given. And we're interested in actually not just some like positive image of dissidents, but we're very interested in looking how dissidence is being constructed discursively in inquisitorial records, and who is speaking in every given moment. This is why we adopted something of an extreme approach to data collection, which actually transforms the original sentences of the sources into structured data, which are very syntactically organized. So, for example, a simple sentence like this is transformed into its deeply structural form, and apart from being structured by us manually, we also add loads of analytical annotation on top of this, in order to then help our analyses. So this is some glimpse, and you do not need to read this really, but this is a glimpse at our approach, how to go from texts to structured data and quantifiable data, but also allowing to study syntactic qualities and more broadly discursive and narrative qualities of inquisitorial records. We have developed recently an interface to do that, and we will be developing it, because this kind of work is never finished. So we'll be developing it over the whole course of the project. By the way, it's an open source tool that everybody can deploy, but still we did not have the time really to write a good documentation. So it's out there for you, for those who are interested in this way of collecting data from sources in a structured way, but very close to our original, in our case, mostly Latin sources. But there is still some homework that we must do in order to describe it well for you, and how to deploy this software and use it. So, this manual approach is complemented by computational text analysis. So, as I said, we are trying to bridge between the two poles. One of them really deep, close reading, but with the benefits of zooming in and zooming out after we structure our data. But also, we are using, and this is one further line in the project, we're using the methods of computational text analysis, or perhaps a different school might say natural language processing, but we have just begun. This is new in the new project, and so still more work to do than done. There we want to build an XML-TEI corpus of edited medieval Inquisitorial material in order to then perform analytical tasks on this and gain some new knowledge. So to wrap up, this is the last slide. We're trying to capture the detail in the original languages, and we hope that this is something that historians will like in our approach. Of course, it's extremely time-consuming, but also it bears fruit, and we are trying to make the process of data collection quicker by developing this user interface that I have just mentioned. Now, so our main dogma, if you will, is that the conditions of production of sources must be the part of the collected data, because without this you just end up with positive data on dissidents, and you're losing all the information which is under such heavy discussion in scholarship about the uses and abuses of inquisitorial records. So and what defines the project is not anymore, as in the first one, that we are using social network analysis and geographic information systems to understand dissidents, but we extended that to various approaches of computational modeling. So in this sense, the new project is much more methodologically promiscuous, depending on the kind of research question that we are trying to answer. And another important extension is that we also look at the discursive patterns, from the very simple ones, such as word frequencies, collocations of words, lexical richness of different registers in comparison, or different depositions even in comparison, to quite some very complex ones which shed new light on the development of deponent narratives. So, and that's all. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, David, for having so punctually shown us how productive an interdisciplinary approach can be in mapping and reading complexity. Thank you so much. And now there's a slight change in the program, so we will have a second speaker, Isabella Gagliardi. I can see her on the screen. Hi, Isabella, and welcome. And Isabella Gagliardi is a professor of history of Christianity at the University of Firenze. Among Isabella Gagliardi's interest, history of religious experience, and particularly female religious experience. And tonight she will show us a project going on, whose title is I tried to translate it in English. I hope I will do it correctly. The Inquisitorial Court in Florence: Structures, Actors, History from its origins to its suppression. So I'll give you the floor, Isabella.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fernanda. Good evening. I wish to thank the organizer of this Congress for giving us the opportunity to present very quickly a project, but really a baby project, because this project started only a few days ago. The youngest stage, if I can see it, of the project is the reason why our intervention does not appear in the conference program. The project came later, so this conference is very, very up to date. Fernanda said the title is correct. Thank you very much. Our research project was formalized between the University of Florence and the Opera the Santa Croce of Florence, which manages the convent's artistic and archival assets. Our project aims to reconstruct the history of the Inquisition in medieval and modern Florence. As you know, the Inquisitorial Tribunal was active in Santa Croce, in the convent of Santa Croce, from the Middle Ages to the modern ages. The project born as a collaboration between historians and architects of the University of Florence. It approached the historical problem from the spatial point of view. So the research will start with the reconstruction and with the identification of the function attributed to the spaces during the various historical periods. The historical architecture part of the project will be directed by Emanuela Ferretti, while the historical part will be directed by me, but in collaboration with Riccardo Parmigiani of the University of Bologna, you well know. The research work will be structured around the following focuses: the spaces and the places of interrogation and deposition, function and historical reconstruction. 2, the spaces and the places of the documents drafting, function and historical reconstruction. 3, the spaces and places of the friar's cultural preparation, function and historical reconstruction, with peculiar attention to the manuscripts and prints. It's well known that most of the documents generated by the Florentine Inquisition during the Middle Age and the Modern Age destroyed in the Napoleonic era. But there are still numerous archival sources belonging to the convent of Santa Croce that must be carefully studied, trying to recover the survivor traces of the inquisitorial activity. In addition, the convent of Santa Croce possesses a very rich heritage of medieval and early modern manuscripts and prints. If we compare the number of texts that have come down to us with those belonging to the other monasteries, for example, with the manuscript belonging to the Dominican convent of Santa Maria Novella, we see that those of Santa Croce are much more numerous, and they still need to be studied systematically. This is a very rich and interesting material that we will have to investigate. These manuscripts are analyzed from a codicological point of view by the research equipe of the Codex project active at SISMEL, Società Italiana di Studio del Medioevo Latino in Florence. We have therefore already contacted the head of the project, Dottoressa Gabriella Pomaro, to sign a collaboration agreement within our group and her group. So in a few days, we will start. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for showing for sharing this newborn project that shows the vitality of the field. And so here we are in our third speaker. Welcome, Jiang. Jiang is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Art History at the University of Zurich. She's working currently on an ERC project. Its title is Global Economies Observation, Art and the Negotiation of Sanctity in the Early Modern Period. Jiang is specialized in early modern global Christianity, with a particular attention to the Catholic missionary rivalries in China, Japan, and the Philippines. And she was a fellow of the Fondazione Cini Venice and the Medici Archive project in Florence and Villa Idati. And tonight she will talk about inquisitorial repression of religious hybridity in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, for your kind introduction. And thank you very much for bearing me. Please bear me for a little while more. And my contribution today will be a rather basic presentation of a project that I'm currently defining to be submitted in 1 or 2 years from now to the European Research Council. If selected, for funding, the project would be carried out in this newly established International Center for Research on Inquisitions of University of Bologna. As I'm still a layperson in the field of Inquisition history, I'm very grateful to Professor Vincenzo Lavegna for giving me an opportunity to share my very preliminary ideas on this future application. Any comments and criticism from the audience will be highly appreciated. In an earlier panel this afternoon, Professor Gabriel Torres Puga has enlightened us about historiography and current trends in the studies on the Mexican Inquisition, and especially on its projection in the Spanish Philippines. In this presentation, I would like to focus furthermore on the Philippine Commissariat, both in relation to the latest research literature, as well as a striking episode, namely an inquisitorial decision on a Taoist festival practiced by the diasporic Chinese in the 17th century Manila. And due to the time limit, I would focus on the literature on the Philippine Commissariat and quickly summarize my case study. The diffusion of Catholicism in the Philippines and the Spanish domination of the archipelago from 1565 to 1898 were inextricably connected. As a governor residing in Manila depended on the Viceroy of New Spain, based in Mexico City, so the inquisitorial jurisdiction on the Philippines pertained to the Tribunal of the Holy Office of Mexico, with a commissary appointed in Manila and other commissaries serving in relatively neighboring territories, such as Ternate, very close to the capital city Manila, and in Mariana Islands, further down to the Pacific Ocean. A Latin American model of evangelization took place in the Philippines, imposing Roman Catholicism, even with coercion, on a multi-ethnic and multi-religious environment. The religion of the Philippine native populations have been characterized by scholars as animism and shamanism, and consisted of the veneration of a supreme being, multiple intermediate deities, and a variety of spirits, both of nature and of the ancestors, called Anito and Diwata. Particularly disappointing for the Spaniards, heirs of centuries of Reconquista wars, was to find a conspicuous Muslim presence in the archipelago, with a stronghold in Mindanao in the south, which led to a situation of endemic warfare with a barren crown, namely the Moro Wars. The religious landscape of the Philippines was further complicated by non-Catholic diasporic communities. Several thousands of Chinese merchants and craftsmen known as Sangleyes, residing in Luzon, practiced Taoism and venerated maritime and household gods, such as Lord Guan and San Guan, namely three officials of heaven, water, and the earth. Additionally, the new Christians of Sephardic origin that settled in the Philippine Islands allegedly pertained certain Judaic practices and rituals. By the 17th century, Manila also attracted Armenian merchants from New Julfa, with an unstable allegiance swinging between the Armenian Apostolic and the Roman Catholic Church. Finally, with the arrival of the Dutch, English, and Danish East Indian companies in Southeast Asia, the Philippines got in contact with different forms of Protestantism and with Anglicanism. All these groups were scrutinized by the Manila Commissary of the Mexican Inquisition. Until now, no attempt has been made to systematically address the religious hybridity of early modern Philippines through the lens of Inquisition activities and records. To which extent this tribunal applied European categories of witchcraft, sorcery, and superstition in order to frame and repress the native religions of the archipelago. Why were natives occasionally tried by the Inquisition, even though theoretically they were exempt from its jurisdiction and subject only to the bishops? In which way the action of Inquisition against Islam related to the political and military interactions of the Spanish authorities with Muslim sultans and the so-called pirates. How did the Inquisition distinguish a non-Catholic religious dimension from one merely civil and hence acceptable in a Catholic society? My project takes up such questions and explores them in the longue durée, stretching between the end of the 16th and the beginning of the 19th century, focusing on a wide selection of trials, letters, and reports from and to the Manila Commissary of the Mexican Inquisition, conserved in the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico City. The only monograph devoted entirely to the Manila Commissariat was published 120 years ago, namely El Tribunal del Santo Oficio de la Inquisición en las Islas Filipinas by the Chilean bibliographer José Toribio Medina. Well, the inquisitorial past faded in the Philippines' public memory. Scholarship on Inquisition was ignored by school textbooks and vaguely mentioned in general histories of this country. The existence of substantial sources became known only in 1965 with the publication of an inventory of Philippines documents in the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico. Subsequently, between 1976 and 1981, Francisco Telor Angeles published 3 articles, respectively, on the historiographical memory of the Commissariat, on its general historical development, and on its undertakings with the Armenian merchants. The importance of this later aspect appeared clear in the last decade, following a fundamental monograph by Sebu Asianian on the trading diaspora of the Armenians from New Judva. Thanks to an analysis of inquisitorial trials originating from the Philippine Commissariat of the Mexican Inquisition, the author succeeded at tracing the twisted trajectories of highly mobile individuals. A study on the first inquisitorial trial originating from the Philippines, published by Fernando Balango Aguado in 2011, shows how, under the level of witchcraft, we can find extraordinary sources on native religious rituals, objects, and cosmologies. While the Dominicans held the commissariat for a long time, Balango Aguado has rightly called for attention also to the 2 first commissaries from the Order of St. Augustine. Research has been undertaken on the prosecution of new Christians, particularly merchants, on account of crypto-Judaism. Substantial attention has been given to the abuse of Inquisition as a political weapon in the trial of the governor Diego de Salcedo in 1668. The centrality of the Inquisition and its censorship role have been analyzed in a study on the book trade in the Philippines. A recent trend, represented in particular by the work of Miguel Rodriguez Lorenzo, focuses on the institutional relations of the Manila Commissariat depending on the Mexican Inquisition and competing jurisdictionally against the Goan Inquisition in the Moluccas. Records of the Manila Commissariat have proved useful for reconstructing the history of enslaved and indebted serfs in Luzon. The exception of the Indians, so-called, from the scrutiny of the Manila Commissariat, valid in general, has been carefully contrasted with the jurisdiction claimed and asserted by the Mexican Inquisition over foreign slaves, such as Chinos. Records of the Inquisition in the Philippines have been used also to study cases of bewildering hybridity, such as Chino slaves practicing the alleged crypto-Judaism of their masters. In an area closely connected with the Philippines as Mariana Islands, we have studies on accusations of solicitatio ad durbia, namely clerical sexual abuses perpetrated during the sacrament of confession, moved against the Jesuits, and on denunciations of controversial devotions promoted by them around the time of suppression of the Society of Jesus. In spite of these many stimulating essays, the Commissariat of the Philippines is almost absent in authoritative works on the Inquisition in the Spanish Empire, or on all the Inquisitions in general. Furthermore, no research has examined specifically the action of the Inquisition in the Philippines against the rituals derived from the native religions. Attention has been paid only to single cases of witchcraft, sorcery, particularly by mestizo women, as well as denunciations and trials concerning clairvoyance and foretelling on the arrival of ships. Crypto-Islamism has been considered only in a study on the trial of a mestizo soldier from the Moluccas, even though we know with certainty that many more cases did occur. To sum up, it seems that I have no time to present my case study on the Taoist ritual being tolerated by the Dominicans in Manila, but denounced by the Jesuits to the Mexican Inquisition. Just to show you quickly some sources I found in the Mexican Inquisitorial archives and Archdiocese archives of Manila and the Jesuit archive in Rome. These rich sources, I would just to sum up as potential approaches in the study of Philippine Inquisition. First, the local sphere. By analyzing these inquisitorial sources, I hope to discover the features that animism, shamanism, Malay interpretations of Islam, and different forms of Chinese popular religion displayed before modern anthropological research became possible. Second, the global sphere. The inquisitorial activity in the Philippines was undertaken on behalf of a tribunal based in Mexico, responding to the Council of the Supreme and General Inquisition in Madrid. The commissaries of Holy Office in Manila participated also in the wider world of counter-Reformation Catholicism, intersected with globally diffused religious orders, and dealt with the ethnic hybridity of multiple types of mestizos. Under inquisitorial scrutiny also fell new Christians belonging to a global Sephardic diaspora, as well as Armenian merchants projected from Persia to East Asia and the Americas. The last, the longue durée. The commissariat was established in 1583, preceded by occasional inquisitorial investigations already from 1577, and finally ceased in 1821. This project would aim to detect the engagement of the Inquisition in the Philippines with religious hybridity over a period of 238 years, focusing on systematic continuities and ruptures, moving beyond individual case studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jiang. I'm sorry for the pressure, but the time is objectively running. And thank you anyway for showing us this very fascinating and compelling project about religious and social hybridity. And very quickly to our next speaker, Claudia Stella Geremia is a PhD student in early modern history at the University of Florence and Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. She is currently working on on her thesis on the Spanish Inquisition in the Canary Islands, elements of African witchcraft, 16th, 18th centuries. And previously, Claudia was a PhD student at University of Caen and worked on witchcraft. And today, she will talk about Inquisition, magic, and objects in the Canary Islands.
Buonasera a tutti, grazie alla professoressa Alfieri per la presentazione e al professor Lavenia per l'invito e per la possibilità di presentare il mio progetto di dottorato. Parlerò in inglese. I'm working on the Spanish Inquisition in the Canary Islands between the 16th and 19th century, specifically the crime of superstition against women alleged witches, in Spanish hechicera and bruja. This difference is essential for the interpretation of the trials in a legal and anthropology key and how to understand the inquisitors' divide in the Canary witches. In the end of the 15th century, Canary Islands became territories of the Spanish monarchy. One of the consequences of this was the transformation of social cultural context of the islands, projected for an isolated position to hub of intense economic exchange between the Mediterranean and Atlantic. If at the first the Canary society was constituted only by the Wanche, the native people, the new population was composed by merchant, travelers, enslaved people from North and Sub-Saharan Africa, gypsies, conversos, moriscos, and the natives who survived the extermination. The Spaniards immediately imposed the Catholic religion, demanding that everyone convert to the religion of the monarchy. For this reason, a district of Spanish Inquisition was established in the island of Gran Canaria in 1505. The Canary Islands Court is the first overseas district to be established. Among the crimes prosecuted by the Holy Office were those of witchcraft and superstition. Studies on the Inquisition of the Canary Islands until now have focused on the kinds of crime through the quantitative and statistical approach, on the institutional aspect of the court, and a little or nothing has been done about the content of the trials of women accused of being witches on their ritual practices, in particular of the women from Africa. For example, the important work of Fajardo Spinola, the first scholar who studied the Canaries court, showed that superstition was the main accusation of the Holy Office's trials. Spinola, under the name Hechiceria and Brujeria, with the help of Gustav Henningsen, calculates that for all of the activities of the Holy Office in the Canary Islands, 368 cases were of witchcraft, namely 307 deal with women considered witches, and whose origin was the most African and Dutch Canarian. The aims of my research is to reconstruct the complex material culture and ritual practices of enslaved women from North Africa and West Africa, accused of being witches by the Spanish Inquisition in the Canary Islands, and this mix and mingle with the ritual practices of the natives of the island. The Canary Islands, for their geographical position between the old and the new world, offer us the opportunity to investigate the history of enslaved people starting from the 15th century, who populated, lived, and fit into the Canary society that had become Spanish. The Canary Archipelago occupies a central role in the history of slavery on the early modern age, placing itself at the center of the mobility of things and people in a maritime space that we know as a Black Atlantic. Objects, you can see some of them in the slide, played an important role in my research, especially most for magical religious purpose that enslaved people to with them to the new land. The magical practices done through this object of African witches are meticulously recounted by the informers, witnesses, and even alleged witches. You mentioned the objects that were used, the Catholic prayers involved in the healing practices, the animal to be sacrificed, and the plants to be used. Each object had a very specific function to carry out in the ritual practices. The goal of my research is to codify the use of objects in ritual practices and to interpret such use in order to investigate their meanings, their cultural and geographical origin. Objects such as scissors, small bag, prayers, seals, fair grain, stone, most of the practices and healing rituals which I found involve the fundamental use, I will say, intercession of objects. I would like to show you of these items described in the trial that I'm analyzing. You can see an example of bolsa in the picture. This bag in Spanish, bolsa, or nomina in Portuguese, was a protective amulet of African derivation. These bolsas were used to contain stone, rose, hair, or Catholic prayers used in a ritual by the witch, whose purpose were primarily to heal people and protect them. The first formal bolsas were found on the coast of Guinea and Mina. They were called by the Portuguese mandingas bag because they were of African origin. The original term should be gris from Senegalese origin, which is translated as magic or enchantment, used mainly in the voodoo ceremonies until nowadays. Scholars who have dealt with the issue in the Atlantic areas, such as Pablo Gomes for the Caribbean, Felipe Ribeiro da Silva for Cape Verde, São Tomé and Príncipe, Danila Calainho for the other territories of Portuguese Inquisition, have started the first reference to bolsas that from the 7th century and were borne by men. Pablo Gomes said that the first bolsa in Atlantic world occurred in 1627. During my research work, I realized that the Canary Islands anticipate this phenomenon of bolsas or nomina by almost a century, and above all they were worn by women and not by men. The first bolsas that I discovered is in the 1524. From the start of the trial, it is clear that the inquisitor had never seen a bag used for the neck and didn't understand its use. It is the witch herself who explained that it was an object of protection, and she explained the contents too. On the 1st June 1524, Inés Garcia, wife of Anton Martin, told to the inquisitor that a man had bought a grain of wheat from a witch and later had given it to her. The man had initially taken the grain in order to make fall in love another woman. This trial is one of the earliest in the series of the Inquisitorial trials the Canary Islands. What is interesting for us is that the Inquisitor wrote about the sale of wheat grain in the text, and the word bolsa appears only in a note at the side in a marginalia. The Inquisitor reported the witness's word, the witch sold me the grain in a bolsa. The way they made reference to the wheat grain and to the bolsa made me understand that this is the first time of Canary Island Inquisitor dealt with this object. 1 year later, in 1525, the bolsa appeared again in the trials of the other Inquisitor as a magical object, together with those objects Inquisitor already knew very well, such as holy stone, sieve, etc. Sorting through the page of the Inquisitor trials and account of witnesses, we can see how references to the bolsa became normal. Inquisitors learning about a new object later criminalized it and demonized it. This is a sort of incaution details. We find another bolsa in the 1586 under the Portuguese name nomina, traia na nomina al quello. We can find this content, the content of this bag is also indicated. What this bag contains? Grain and the oration of Santa Marta. The figure of Santa Marta in the trials is also very important. And for this, we show you another object that I discovered inside a trial. This is an image. The picture is represented Santa Marta, so it's a Catholic image. And about the person who was accused of being a brook, of being a witch, we know that there is a black woman from the black woman, I quote, for the island of Terceira. To conclude, I'm currently analyzing the trials of women native of the Canary Island. and of the African continent. The content of these trials led me to think that the magic of the Canary Islands is different from both the European and the New World ones in terms of characteristics, structure, and the use of objects. I'm also comparing the data relating to the trials of the Canary Island Inquisition with those of the other archipelagos of the Middle Atlantic, such as Azores, Madeira, Cape Verde, and the Caribbean. Taking into account the two differences, such as the institution detected in some of these places that was Portuguese and not Spanish. What these places have in common is the presence of a large number of enslaved people from sub-Saharan Africa. The Canary Islands are a laboratory since they seem to anticipate phenomena. The Bolsa is only a case of study, which became widespread in a whole Atlantic space. Thanks.
Geremia for this very fascinating project full of so many rich material aspects. So here we are, our last speaker, Mila Fumini. Mila is an historian interested in history and digital humanities, and she organized the digital library Natural Rights History Sources for the University of Milan and Fondazione Firpo, and she's currently a part of the research of the Bolognese research team on sacrifice in Europe of religious conflicts, coordinated by Vincenzo Lavegna. And tonight she will present the Inquire website. I give you the floor and my chair.
And now, finalmente. The context in which a discipline or a subject is born, develops, and evolves affects both its nature and history in some way. For instance, the digital humanities grew out of debates between World War I and II, and their reasoning is based on the vast availability and material that can be conveniently accessed in a well-organized way, keeping up with the readers' and scholars' needs. This way, sources can be located quickly. In practice, these are the features that, many decades later, have come to characterize the World Wide Web platform. When we decide to carry out researches, we are moved by much more complex implications than spending hours randomly interrogating the World Wide Web. At the same time, it's true that the possibility of interacting, reading, and interpreting text through methodologies rooted in conjunctional linguistics have radically revolutionized the world of research, especially of their historical and linguistic kind. In many cases, and especially in the Italian field, there are robust archival information systems that can break down at last some of the randomness of different queries and ensure data quality. At the same time, it's absolutely possible to carry out an analysis from the comfort of one's own desk using a range of tools and systems that we all have from JSTOR to Google Books via description and research tools. And then, digitization of primary sources through the works of conservators such as preservation institutes, documentation and research centers, libraries, digital libraries, and finally, the dozen of source portals made available by publishing houses and research institutes. Unfortunately, or fortunately, nothing will replace the beauty of the journey of crossing the threshold of the places where those books and papers are kept. Nothing will make us understand the meaning of an archive or of its documentary collection, like walking along the roads that lead to these archives and libraries. In the case of historical documents, digitization process entails the remediation of sources. In order to be able to speak of digitization in the full sense, it's not enough to have a digital copy of a material document. The digitized copy must be accompanied by metadata, which in turn provide information and which must enable interoperability between the digitized sources. A connection is thus created between different sources through the combination of metadata, which, if linked to a thesaurus, can exploit the possibilities of the semantic web. These processes are not visible or comprehensible to the user, but allow one to navigate within digital aggregation, exploiting different ontologies, each time according to the result given by the primary search. This is what we can call a digital neo-intermediation, where the digital document is easily accessible and linked to other documents through the use of metadata and tags. It's these links that route the researcher following the translation of either text string or meanings. They can also affect the researcher to an unprecedented degree. So he fishes by casting his net into the open sea, hoping to catch something, but has an invisible helper who directs the fish he thinks the fisherman might like into the net. In the field of history, as in many others, the media is surely not the means, but it can become an extremely powerful, enriching, and democratizing medium. This is especially true for research fed by a steady and continuous exchange with the external environment in which it unfolds. Pondering the potential methods and broader horizon of meaning of a subject, such as digital humanities in this moment, I'm once again convinced that this method and discipline may be the foundation of a very near future, that is, a time in which online publishing, beyond eliminating the difficulty of traveling to physically rich sources, may enable a new founding up of heuristic and historical research. As Federico Valacchi rightly pointed out a few years ago, the future will not be so much about publication, but about the use of intercontextual and intercultural models of representation and description, and ultimately, the use of what will be developed through artificial intelligence. Publishing a source or a set of sources online does not replace the primary and inalienable experience of our physical digging through the archives. Nothing can ever substitute opening a sheaf of papers in the Vatican Apostolic Archive and finding pieces of straw that cushion at the crates once used to transport the document to Paris by order of Napoleon. Such a physical experience may certainly take place with a greater degree of awareness and knowledge than we are bound when entering the archives as PhD students, when we open bundle after bundle without having the slightest idea of what the mainstream was going to be, and can certainly take place with a greater degree of our awareness and knowledge, thanks to physical mediation exercised by archivists. In her 2016 speech at the Congress of the American Historical Association, Lara Putnam raised a number of points about online research using the tools offered by these digitization portals, all deserving further examination. Her initial statement says, "For the first time, historians can find without knowing where to look," was emblematic when touching on the risks and limits of the digitization. Putnam's observation appeared to be highly accurate, irreverent, and important. She suggests that by now it's possible to conduct research as to the tools offer us a sufficient number of digitized sources. In the same way we would go fishing, sure, Putnam talks about fishing expeditions, sure in the knowledge that either our imagination or algorithms will deliver us something. And yet the historian questioned whether research can really be carried out effectively without having to undergo the classic apprenticeship made up of travel and knowledge, the archives, which offers at the same time familiarity with sites, cities, and country. Selective digitization of archival resources extrapolated from the analog integrity of the sources was more of a problem of recontextualization, and what we call invented archives can take shape with problems of precision of the original bond and potential contextual alteration. The issue goes beyond the metadata. It's much more delicate, since selective digitization is a sort of return to the origins. The decision to structure the Inquire website was based on the need to have a tool that would help both in the publication of an extensive bibliography on Inquisitorial studies, whilst making these documents available to a greater public. To do this, it was decided to use a tool that would allow everyone to navigate it, but could also function as a backend. It's designed to be extremely user-friendly, given that the updating of files and information will be managed by several people who are part of the research group. For this reason, it was decided to use one of the most used and standard page builders among those used on the web. This will also prevent the site from being tied to the purchase of licenses leading to copyrights. Plugins for importing and setting up an internal database and files exported in .csv format were also included. At the same time, two in-depth studies will be carried out at a larger stage. One is the creation of an iconographic repertoire, which will be represented in a gallery with appropriate indexing and metadata, and later on will be correlated as accurately as possible with the text published in the database. The second area that will be developed is in regards of the graphical representation of the data from a geometric point of view. The compilation of the bibliographical database already offers us a specific kind and vast amount of data that allows us to make a volumetric analysis, for example, of the editions produced in a given city, or to examine not only the area of publication of the books, but also the years of major production and, of course, finally, the number of works, final author, and the correlation of these with others related to his production. This is the first version of the mock-up of Inquire website, which is being tested to prove that it's a suitable tool for researchers. As of now, it's still offline. It will be published in the first quarter of the next calendar year, after further beta testing by scholars and students. Thus, the homepage presents the 6th section that constitutes the macro areas for research and the 6 bibliographical databases developed by my colleagues. In each of these macro areas, there are 2 subsections which give access to the navigation of the source page on the one hand and the bibliographies of secondary sources on the other. The system is extremely easy to manage with an intuitive working environment such as Page Builder, which allow people who are not very familiar with the computer medium to update it without ever having to intervene in the programming language. Thank you.
I think, as you heard, time is finished. I don't think maybe a couple of minutes for a question. I don't want to steal the time, so I maybe the public, the people in the room and the people connected. So raise your hand, basically your work. And in the meantime, I invite Canary for the final remarks and practical information. So don't be scared by pressure. Of course, there are many things that we would like to know, and I apologize for being so severe with the speakers, but we cannot negotiate with them. So we
have to go outside even because this department was a jail in the case. Yeah. Not inquisitorial jail. Me, Vincenzo, and Irene, we want to thank you all for the high quality of your participation, the high quality of your paper. We want to thank all, both at home, both in presence, to the audience too. We want to thank Danny for his work of organization. It was wonderful for us to have all of you in Bologna, and we hope to have a new opportunity in the new year with the second annual conference. Soon the speakers will receive a mail with the instruction about the rules for the publication of the acts. It will be quite soon, and the deadline will be in spring, next spring but you will receive more information. So we are in a hurry, so we have to close. Thank you again to you all, and see you next year in Bologna. Thank you.